Shalom all, we now come to Exodus chapters 11 to 13 of our annual study of Genesis to Revelations. Now the household of Jacob have been in Egypt for 430 years. Remember, 70 people from his loins went in and made up a number of 12 households, 12 sons. Yahweh God is now about to take them out, return them to the knowledge and practice of his way, and give them a memorial of this grand new beginning. It is not by coincidence he starts this rebirth at the beginning of his heavenly calendar as marked by the permanent ordinance of the sun and moon. Note the very first commandment given to them is the keeping of the Passover. Starting at chapter 11 verse 1. And Yahweh said to Moses, Yet will I bring one plague more upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go hence. When he shall let you go, he shall surely thrust you out hence altogether. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his neighbour, and every woman of her neighbour, jewels of silver and jewels of gold. And Yahweh gave the people favour in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. And all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon his throne, even unto the firstborn of the maid servant that is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of the beast. Verse 6. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there was none like it, nor shall be any more. And last verse 7, verse 7. But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that you may know how Yahweh doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. And all these thy servants shall come down unto me, and bow down themselves unto me, saying, Get thee out. And all the people that follow thee, and after that I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in a great anger. So here we have, the point I want to make here is that God has put a difference between his people and those of Egypt. Egypt representing the world, so he's put a difference between people of him and people of the world. Yet his people put no difference between themselves and those of the world. Even bringing things, and I say those, his people, mean people who seekers of him, who want to be like him and be of the faith of Abraham. I'm not saying they are, but that's what they're purporting to want to achieve. So even bringing things, habits and cultures of the world into church, and still think it's a place that God will visit. Remember Ezekiel 22:26. It reads, And her priests, and it's not just limited to priests, her priests have violated my law and have profaned mine holy things. They have put no difference between the holy and the profane, neither have they showed a difference between the unclean and the clean, and have hid their eyes from my Sabbaths, and I am profane among them. And then Acts 59, and this is Peter speaking about Cornelius, when Cornelius was called to faith. And put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. So as it says in Ezekiel 22, they've put no difference between things of clean and unclean, and have hidden their eyes from God's Sabbaths. People now come up with an excuse. They've been told, we can worship God any day. And so they've put no difference between things of God or times of God and any other time. There is no difference between what obedience and actions God requires from Jew or Gentile.
Now, God's children of Israel, the nation, is made up of, the word children doesn't mean there's 12 sons of Jacob. It means the children of Israel, the nation, which includes the servants and so forth. So we are not to confuse the children thinking it's just the 12 sons or the literal loins out of Jacob. There's two different Hebrew words for children. One, although in English they've called them both children, but one of the Hebrew words is for all the congregation, and another of the Hebrew word is specifically just for the literal 12 sons of Jacob. We should cover that later on in our studies.
So any teaching or pastor that says there is not of God. God stated Gentiles did not have to be circumcised unless they wanted to eat the Passover lamb. We'll see that below in other verses. That is the only difference, from keeping them. That is the only difference, or should I say, the eating of the lamb itself is different from keeping the memorial on the day and the days of unleavened bread. Another crucial point for us to understand is the English word children, because it talks about, for example, in verse 7, but against any of the children of Israel. So this word children of Israel, some people would like you to think it's just the Hebrew people that came out of the 70 loins of Jacob. We should see that God has never spoken of two groups. When he speaks of the group that went in, came out, and things to do, he gives them one name, and that name applies to the whole group, all the households, servants included. But it's the translation of the word children that puts in our minds, especially when pastors will want you to think about it, that is just talking about the literal children of Jacob's loins. It is not in the Hebrew understanding of the word. There are many words in Hebrew that sometimes the English transfers into the same word, say children, when in Hebrew it's 3 or 4 or more words. Now the one that's used in Hebrew for, in this case, the children of Israel, is a one that's called Bain. It's a numerical value of H1121, if you want to look it up, and it comes from the word H1129, which literally means, going from Strong's Concordance, a son as a builder of the family name, in the widest sense of a literal and figurative relationship, including grandson, subject, nation. So note, in the wider sense, a builder of a family name, meaning the household. Now you're part of this family, this household. Now it is used 4,925 times in the King James Version. There are a few other Hebrew words also translated as children, but they are used very few times, and I've got a list of them in the written version where you can see where they are. You can see these in the article called Heirs of the Kingdom, Citizens of the Promise. But what is the difference between these children and the words when the word children is used other places? Well, it is like asking what is the difference between Israel's children and Israel's children. It depends on which Israel we are referring. Remember, Jacob's name was changed to Israel, and then God said that Israel, the nation, is his firstborn. So Israel, the nation, the extended family or congregation that went into and is about to come out of Egypt? Or are we talking about Israel, Jacob, the individual who was first named Jacob? Now, for the rest of the explanation of this point, you can, as I said, see the article Heirs of the Kingdom, Children of the Promise on www.forttoyahweh.com. Okay, back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Now remember, Noah had a calendar. He did things on the first of the month, or on the first day of the month, and so on. So this is not the 1st of January. Well, the first month is not January, nor is the first of the month on the 1st of January, or what we call the first of any month, whether it's January, February, March, or so forth. This beginning of the year, it corresponds to what, in our calendar, the end of March, beginning of April. It changes from year to year because it has the days for, you try and match up calendars. Now, it was originally called Abib, in chapter 13, verse 4, we'll see below. But after the Babylonian captivity, it was called Nisan. We read this in Nehemiah chapters 2 verse 1 and Esther chapters 3 verse 7. And remember from Genesis chapters 1 and 13, God's calendar is set by the sun and the moon, the two firmaments, the two lights he put in the firmament to mark time. And God has a 30-day calendar which starts on the new moon. The first day of the month is when you see the new moon, not when our calendar says it's the first of the month. Now when you see a new moon, that starts the new month. Okay, chapter 12, verse 5 of Exodus. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats. Verse 11. And thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is Yahweh's Passover. Not a Jewish one, it's Yahweh's Passover. Verse 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am Yahweh. Verse 14. And this day shall be unto you a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. Verse 15. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread, even the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whosoever eateth leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. And remember, Israel is a mixture of people. Now these days are gods, as I said, not Jewish. They simply keep it. They're just a group of people who keep it. So that's why we think things are Jewish. Just like we eat Mexican food, it's not Mexican food, it's just food. It's just that Mexican people eat it that way. So we are to stop calling things Jewish. They are gods. Well, unless they're specifically a tradition that Jewish people have introduced. And you will see this and the other feasts of God listed in Leviticus chapters 23 verse 2, where he says, these are my feast, and some other term he gives it, but he identifies them as his. Now remember, another term of God's for Israel's household is my people, or children of Israel. Now, lastly, clearing out leaven or yeast products from the house before Passover, maybe from where the concept of spring cleaning came. So it doesn't take much, it's something we should be doing, going through our houses the days before Passover and clearing out any yeast products. And it's for the sake of getting to salvation or what God requires of us, there's no harm doing it. Not doing it may cost you harm. You may be cut off from his promise. So I suggest that if sometimes we do these things that we think is insignificant, because it's better to have something you do not need than to need something you do not have. Exodus chapters 12 verse 16. And in the first day there shall be a holy convocation. That means a holy gathering of his people. And the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation to you. No manner of work shall be done in them. Just as the first and the last day, you can work in between them. Save that which every man must eat, that only may be done of you. Verse 17. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this self same day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. Verse 19. 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eateth that which is leaven, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. Verse 24. And you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. Also see chapters 13 verses 8 to 9 below. A memorial of God redeeming his people. Just as one keeps an annual memorial of their special days, whether it's a birthday, a wedding day or something, it is a memorial kept annually, not weekly. Exodus chapter 12 verse 26. And it shall come to pass when your children shall say unto you, what mean you by this service? That you shall say, it is the sacrifice of Yahweh's Passover, who passed over the house of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. And the people bowed the head and worshipped. Verse 32. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone, and bless me also. That's what Pharaoh is now saying when he eventually lets them go. Which is a big change of heart from what he said in chapters 5 verse 2, I think. Who is this Yahweh? I don't know him, etc. Now, some people may think, because that's what the denominations tell them, that this is just to be remembered by Israel, because it was him that he saved. No, this is memorial of God's people. Remember, the people he took out was people who joined themselves to him. Yes, and it's a memorial of how he redeemed his original church. Actually, we read in Acts chapter 7 verse 38, I think, later on. Actually, let me read you Acts chapter 7:38. This is he that was in the church in the wilderness, with the angel who spoke to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give unto us. This is Paul talking in Acts. Actually, it's not Paul talking. It is Stephen. But this is the beginning of God's church, the congregation he took out of Israel. So it's the Passover is when he redeemed his church from the clutches of being in Egypt in bondage. Okay, chapter 12 verse 36. And Yahweh gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they went out, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. Remember the promise of God in Genesis 15:13 to Abraham, which reads, And he said unto Abraham, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. That's a rounded up figure, by the way, it's 430 years, which we see later on. And then Genesis chapters 15:14, And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance. So we are now seeing the judgment of Egypt and their gods, and we are seeing also Abraham's descendants coming out with great substance. Exodus chapter 12 verse 37. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot, that were men beside children, and a mixed multitude went up also with them. Verse 41. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the self-same day, it came to pass that all the hosts of Yahweh went out from the land of Egypt. Verse 42. It is a night to be much observed unto Yahweh for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of Yahweh to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. Verse 43. And Yahweh said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof, but every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner and a hired servant shall not eat thereof. So there's a difference. In one house shall it be eaten, thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall ye break a bone thereof. Is a point to get from this verse. If you remember, when Yeshua was on the cross with two other thieves, they didn't break his legs, although they broke the legs of the other two thieves. They found he was already dead, and they pierced his side with a spear instead. Exodus chapter 12:48. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to Yahweh, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come there and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. Verse 49, one law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. And it says, no uncircumcised person shall eat it. So since all the direct descendants of Abraham were to be circumcised in adherence to the covenant, it should mean that an uncircumcised Hebrew can neither eat the Passover lamb. So whether you're a stranger or a Hebrew, if you're uncircumcised, you cannot eat the Passover. Now this annual Passover memorial of God's redemption of his firstborn son, Israel, has been turned into a weekly Holy Communion, or sometimes quarterly communion, through traditions of the Catholic Church being adopted by the Protestant offshoots, whether it's Baptist, Pentecostal and so forth, will do it. They then interpret 1 Corinthians chapters 11:20, which reads, when you come together, therefore, into one place, this is not to eat the Lord's Supper. They see the when as when they want to do it, rather than when God commanded it to be done. People have a tradition, and then they're trying to find a scripture that supports the tradition. The when is meant to be a Passover meal. Passover is only kept once per year, and it's not the Lord's Supper. That's why they try and change what God wants by changing the wording. It's not a Lord's Supper, it was a Passover meal. Mark chapter 7 verse 9, and Yeshua said unto them, full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your tradition. These studies are for you to identify the traditions of men or denomination or denominations in your life and replace them with obedience to the commandments of God. Chapter 13, I'm going to start at verse 3. And Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand Yahweh brought you out from this place. There shall no leaven be eaten. This day came you out in the month Abib. Verse 8 of chapter 13, verse 8. And thou shalt show thy son in that day, saying, this is done because of that which Yahweh did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be for a sign unto thee, and upon thy hand, and a sign upon thine hand, and for a memorial between thy eyes, that Yahweh's laws may be in thy mouth. For with a strong hand Yahweh brought thee out of Egypt. Verse 10. Thou shalt therefore keep this ordinance in his season from year to year. This is an annual event. Verse 15. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that Yahweh slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to Yahweh all that open up the matrix, being males, but all the firstborn of my children I redeem. And it shall be for a token unto thy hand, and for frontlets between thy eyes, for by the strength of the hand of Yahweh brought us forth out of Egypt. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return into Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Egypt went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. Verse 19. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry my bones out of this place. So as I said, with Jacob, everyone that went into Egypt came out, even Joseph's dead body bones. So, verse 13, Moses is telling them that they're coming out of bondage. In Egypt is bondage. In Egypt, they did not have God's laws. They were just living under Egyptian laws and so on. Today, the people are told that coming and trying to keep God's commandments is going into bondage. It's legalism. You see, I say the devil's deceivers or ministers twist the things wrong way round. Keeping God's commandments is freedom. It is not the bondage. Clearly, they were in bondage when they did not have them. When they were in Egypt, God took them out of being in bondage without his laws and took them to a place where they had his laws. That is freedom. Do not let anyone tell you different. Follow the scriptures. Shalom.